Chapter 9. Rachel had spent an inordinate amount of time driving around the lake hoping to catch a glimpse of the wolf somewhere near Jake's cabin. Even so, she didn't immediately figure out that he'd left town. But when she phoned the general store at closing time to casually ask Ted about it, he confirmed that Jake was gone. Ted had agreed to collect Jake's mail from the rural box by the road, as usual. He went to Frisco for some reason, he informed Rachel. Said he'd be home day after tomorrow. You need to see him. She was ready for the question. I'm planning to take some day hikes for inspiration. I thought he could help me figure out the best options. I thought you were mad at him. Trust good old Ted to come up with the significant point of the discussion. I am, but he's an expert in this field, so I can't let my irritation keep me from getting good advice, right? I suppose not. That's a very mature attitude to take, Rachel. Thank you. I thought so too. Good thing she was on the phone instead of looking straight at Ted. If he could have seen her face, he would have realized she was handing him a line of bull. Phones were an excellent invention. Well, gotta go. Right. See you later. She hung up quickly because she wanted to hot-foot it over to Jake's now that she knew he was gone. Too bad she hadn't tweaked to it sooner, but at least she had tonight and tomorrow to snoop. Somewhere on his property she would find evidence of a wolf. Then she would confront him with it. Grabbing her backpack, she climbed in her truck and drove around the lake. But as she started to park in front of his cabin, she thought better of it. Several yards beyond his cabin, an old logging road wound back into the woods. That would work. She passed up his cabin, turned off there, and parked where her truck couldn't be seen from the road. Might as well not advertise her presence. Polecat was a small community and she'd rather not have anyone ask why she'd been at Jake's. Aside from not wanting to state her reason for being there, she wouldn't want anyone to think she was a friend of his. She definitely was not. Although he had the gall to deny it, he was harboring a wolf, and not very humanely at that. Initially she'd told him that she wouldn't turn him in to the authorities, but he'd destroyed her goodwill with his arrogant attitude. The wolf was the only thing keeping her from calling the law down on Jake's head. She didn't want to cause that poor animal any more stress than it had already endured. Maybe if she went over there, the wolf would come out of hiding. She wondered if Jake had made any provision for it before he jetted off to San Francisco. The more she thought about his cavalier behavior toward such a magnificent animal, the more she fumed. With her truck tucked out of sight, she slipped on her pack and walked back to his cabin. She'd start in the back because she wouldn't expect to find the wolf anywhere near the road. She had dog treats in the backpack along with a collar and leash. She'd bought the supplies the day after her run-in with Jake, and had kept them with her whenever she went out searching for the wolf. She hoped that the treats might convince the wolf to let her collar and leash him. Then she'd use more treats to coax him back to her truck. She had no compunction about stealing the wolf out from under the nose of an untrustworthy person like Jake, but the wolf might not cooperate. When she'd had him at her place, he had been hell-bent on getting back over here. The wolf's devotion to a man who had only a casual interest in his pet's welfare stuck in her craw. Such unquestioning loyalty reflected well on the wolf, but he might pay dearly for it if Jake shipped him off to a zoo or a sanctuary in the near future. She couldn't bear the thought. If she couldn't steal the wolf, she might have to negotiate with Jake to buy him. But first she had to get that infuriating man to admit he had such an animal. Every time she pictured him standing there stony-faced while he lied through his teeth, she felt like hitting something like him. She was so wrapped up in her murderous thoughts that she almost stepped on an outstanding piece of evidence. With a soft cry, she leaped back before she crushed an imprint in the moist earth next to the lake. The paw print was large, and while it could have been made by a dog, she knew it hadn't been. Stepping carefully, she discovered several similar paw prints. Taking out her camera phone, she snapped pictures of them before following the trail that led directly to Jake's deck. Let him deny this. She took more pictures to document what she considered concrete evidence. Once on the deck, she glanced around. When she'd used her binoculars to scan the area, she hadn't paid much attention to Jake's outdoor furniture. He had an expensive gas grill and an elevated patio table surrounded by 4 tall chairs. Probably suited a big guy like him. Finally she walked over to the slider and peered in. No wolf stood on the other side. No doubt the slider was locked, but she tugged on it anyway for good measure. It glided open smoothly, as if recently cleaned and oiled. Heart-pounding, she quickly closed it. She was willing to trespass on the outside of his property, but going into his house when he wasn't home was a whole different level of invasion. On top of that, the wolf might be inside, silently guarding the house. She didn't think the animal would attack her after recently saving her life, but she would be encroaching on his master's territory. That might change the rules. Turning away from the unlatched slider, she studied the deck, not sure what she might be looking for. There, crouching down, she examined some bits of black hair caught between the deck's weathered gray floorboards. She took pictures of that too. Unfortunately, Jake had hair just like it, so this bit of evidence wasn't so telling. But he couldn't explain the paw prints unless he had the ability to change into a wolf, and she gasped and went very still. Now there was a crazy thought, a completely impossible concept that had no business taking up residence in her brain. Standing, she gazed out over the lake toward her cabin, as if the familiar sight of her house and her workshop would help ground her in reality and wipe out that scary idea she'd just come up with. If anyone could read her mind right now, they'd ship her off to a mental ward. Sure, legends were fun to think about, but nobody actually believed in such things as werewolves. Suddenly breathing became a real chore, and her tummy didn't feel so good either. She was letting her imagination run away with her again, of course. Werewolves only existed in books. They didn't live in cabins on Polecat Lake, drive trucks and run trekking companies. Except that would explain everything. She remembered the angry red welts on Jake's torso, welts that were on the same side as the wounds the wolf had received from the bear's claws. Jake's nose had been bruised too, as if someone had hit him, someone with a baseball bat. The air was soft and warm on this summer evening, but Rachel couldn't stop shivering. No doubt this was a horrible nightmare and she'd wake up from it in few minutes. She pinched herself and it hurt like hell. So much for that remedy. The cry of a hawk overhead caused her to glance up and remember. Years ago, she'd been obsessed with Ladyhawke, a movie about two lovers placed under a spell. At night he'd turned into a wolf, and at dawn she'd become a hawk. Rachel's young heart had been captured by the love story, and she'd watched that movie over and over. Had the story stuck in her mind and emerged now to create this wild scenario? Possibly. Her imagination could be her greatest asset or her biggest enemy. Even her friends said so. And wait, Jake had a grill, for crying out loud. A werewolf wouldn't need a grill. So there. The grill and the patio furniture were both normal guy stuff. That didn't fit with her goofy werewolf idea at all. Also, she'd allowed herself to become too invested in the fate of Jake's pet wolf. Of course he had one, and it was either in his cabin or in hiding somewhere. Jake might not have any intention of sending it to a zoo either. Yes, she owed that wolf a lot, but he seemed happy enough here with Jake. She might want to start minding her own business. She had a commission work in progress, and her client would be expecting it to be finished and hanging in the lobby of his office building within the next month. Taking a deep breath, she started back down the steps of Jake's deck. Time to head home, brew a nice pot of tea, and get back to work. Before she did that, though, she'd call her parents. She hadn't done that in a couple of weeks. Inviting them up for a visit sounded like a really good idea, too. She imagined how great it would be to see her mom and dad again, and the fun they could have grilling outside, just like her neighbor Jake, who was certainly not a werewolf, while they enjoyed the view of the lake and the mountains. She was a good 10 steps away from Jake's deck when she admitted why that image appealed to her so much. She was scared to death. Scared and running away from something that might be outside the bounds of her experience. Way outside. Like a little girl, she wanted her mommy and daddy to make everything nice and safe again. But damn it, she'd seen those welts on Jake's torso and the bruise on his nose. She hadn't imagined them, and she hadn't imagined a wolf that had shown up right when she needed saving from a bear. Maybe that hadn't been a coincidence after all. Jake had been careless enough to leave his sliding door open. Or maybe it was an ingrained habit. The wolf, who might or might not be Jake, needed an unlatched slider for easy entrance and exits. She'd come this far. If she left now without checking inside his house, she might never learn the truth. She might search the place and find nothing conclusive, but at least she would have made use of this time while he was gone. Retracing her route and climbing the steps back up to his deck took more courage than she'd expected. She felt like Belle in Beauty and the Beast. The wolf, an actual one, might still be inside the cabin though, and she should be careful. Then she thought of the message taught by the fairy tale. Despite his fearsome looks, that beast hadn't been dangerous. She had no reason to fear the wolf, either. The creature that had attacked the bear, whatever that creature was, had been intent on her safety, not her destruction. But all that self-talk didn't stop her heart from beating wildly as she opened the slider. Wolf? Are you in here? Silence greeted her. I'm coming in and I mean no harm. After listening for any telltale sound of toenails on the floorboards, a growl or a snuffle, she stepped inside Jake's cabin. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until dizziness made her grab the back of an easy chair near the slider. Gulping in air, she stood beside the chair until she felt steady again. Wolf? Are you in here? After spending 24 hours with him, she thought he'd surely come out to investigate when he heard her familiar voice. The utter quiet in the cabin told her the wolf was not here. Maybe because he's in San Francisco. Swallowing her nervousness, she slipped off her backpack and left it on the chair. Then she took a deep breath and looked around. The cabin seemed much as it had the other day, ordinary. The layout resembled hers, as she'd noted before. Her grandfather had said the two homes had been built around the same time. Furniture selection was limited in a place like Polecat, so it wasn't surprising that Jake's looked quite a bit like hers, too. At first she moved tentatively through the house, afraid to touch anything. But within a short time, when no wolf appeared, she grew bolder. Starting with the kitchen, she opened cabinets and drawers in search of mysterious items. Nothing turned up. A bottle opener with the wolf's head on it was the only slightly different utensil, but this was Alaska. Such things could be found in any tourist shop. His canned goods revealed nothing either. Apparently he liked organic cereal with dried fruit and nuts because he had a supply of that. When she opened his freezer, she discovered it was full of red meat, but that wasn't significant either. Many guys built like Jake enjoyed their burgers and steaks. She found fresh veggies in the refrigerator's bottom section, staples like potatoes, carrots, and onions. Obviously he didn't live on an all-meat diet. In fact, he had a good variety of food for being a bachelor. He'd stocked in eggs, milk, and cottage cheese, along with several bottles of spruce tip ale. She left the kitchen feeling no wiser than she had before, but calmer. So far, there was nothing scary about Jake's place. In the living room, she rummaged through his DVDs and discovered no werewolf movies in the mix. His bookshelf contained paperback mysteries, some science fiction, and a few non-fiction books on hiking trails in Alaska. Then she saw a book she recognized because she had one just like it at home. It was titled Alaskan Artisans of Today. She was featured in that book, which was only about 6 months old. Why would he buy an expensive coffee table book that included pictures of her and her work, yet be so determined to give away her original wolf carving? Maybe he'd read something about her in the book that had turned him off. Flipping to the section devoted to her, she found a folded sheet of notepaper. It looked vaguely familiar, and when she opened it, she blinked in surprise. Instead of ignoring her note, as she'd imagined, he'd saved it. Even more astounding, he'd saved it for a couple of years before placing it in this book. These weren't the actions of someone who was indifferent to her, or who had tired of having her work in his house. She didn't know if Jake was a shapeshifter or not, but he was definitely more complicated than she'd originally thought. Replacing the book, she moved into his bedroom. The atmosphere here was so potently male that she caught her breath. Testosterone oozed from the oversized bed with its massive peeled log bedposts and huge mattress. She'd been drawn to it the first time she'd walked into this room, and now she had the luxury of being here without supervision. Giving in to temptation, she walked to the side of the bed, leaned over it, with her arms outstretched, and slid up onto the mattress. She let her feet dangle off the edge, but the bed was big enough that she could have lain crossways on it, no problem. With her cheek resting against the soft comforter, she breathed in Jake's scent. Too bad her interaction with him had become so damned confusing and strange, because she'd felt chemistry between them from the beginning. Rubbing her cheek against the material, she imagined lying here with Jake as sexual. Awareness hummed deep in her belly. Well, this was pleasant, but it wasn't getting her any closer to the truth about Jake Hunter. After levering herself off the bed, she smoothed the comforter back into place. Then she opened his nightstand drawer fully, expecting she might find a package of condoms there. Many guys kept them handy. By the bed. No condoms. But she found a notepad, a couple of pens, and underneath that, slim paperback titled down with dogma, Benefits of Human Cooperation. She held the book for several seconds as her heart thudded wildly and her brain struggled to make sense of what she was seeing. With trembling hands, she opened the cover and scanned the first page. The word werewolf leaped out at her as if surrounded with blinking lights. She seemed to be holding a treatise of some kind that had been written by a werewolf. Or perhaps the author, Duncan McDowell, was pretending to be a werewolf. Could be a spoof. In fact, it probably was. She was panicking for no reason. But as she thumbed through the pages, she discovered the text had been marked up apparently by Jake. Spoofs didn't usually prompt people to do that. They read the jokes, laughed, and passed on the funny book to the next person. They didn't underline and write notes in the margin. Her heart rate picked up again. The book was for real. She wasn't sure what that meant, but she had some ideas. Sinking down to the bed, she drew in a quivering breath and began to read. Eventually that position became uncomfortable, but she couldn't stop reading. Her eyes still glued to the pages, she nudged off her shoes, turned one of Jake's gigantic pillows on end, and scooted up on the bed. She leaned back. Much better. She was halfway through the book when a soft sound penetrated her deep concentration. She glanced up and nearly fainted from shock. Jake stood in the bedroom doorway. She stared at him for what seemed like forever as adrenaline pumped through her veins and flushed her skin. He looked every inch a man, an extremely virile, travel-rumpled man. He'd pulled his dark green shirt loose from the waistband of his jeans, as if he'd needed to be more comfortable on the drive home from the airport. Concern was etched on his rugged face, but she saw no menace in his expression. He didn't seem angry to discover her trespassing on his property. She had the odd thought that of the two of them, he might have more to fear than she did. Slowly she closed the book before sliding to the edge of the bed and putting both feet on the floor. Then she swallowed in an attempt to remove the metallic taste from her mouth. "You're back early." "So it seems." His voice sounded as rusty as hers felt. Looking into his green eyes, she searched for answers. "Who are you, Jake?" "You're across the lake neighbor." "And you tell me." But his resigned expression indicated he knew the game was over. She felt lightheaded as she balanced on the brink of a truth she'd never imagined could be possible. "I think," she paused to lick her dry lips, "I think you save careless women from ferocious mother bears." "Maybe." She sucked in a breath. He hadn't denied it. "Instead of asking who you are, should I ask what you are?" That sparked the anger she might have expected earlier when he'd first caught her going through his things. "I'm still a who, Rachel, regardless of what form I take. I'm a creature with a soul and a conscience. I'm a thinking being. At all times. I'm no monster." She'd hurt him. What an astonishing thought. "I'm sorry. That wasn't very sensitive of me to say." She gripped the book tightly in both hands, needing something to hold on to. "But give me some credit for not becoming hysterical." "Okay. I wouldn't expect that of you. Anyone who leads a full-grown wolf into her bedroom and dresses his wounds isn't the hysterical type." Her pulse quickened. "So you really are a—" She couldn't make herself say it. The idea seemed too preposterous, even with the evidence all around her. "A werewolf." "Yes, I am." She took several quick, shallow breaths and managed not to faint. "Wow." She didn't really believe him. Not yet anyway. Such things took a while to sink in. "And I would give anything, all I possess in this world, if you'd never found that out." Fear skittered up her spine for the first time since he'd arrived. "Because you're going to kill me." "No. God, no. I could never hurt you." Her shoulders sagged. "That's a relief." Her laughter was edged with the hysteria she denied feeling seconds ago. "I was afraid you might walk over here and break my neck with one easy twist. Damn it, I saved you from the bear. How could you think I'd kill you?" "Because I know too much. It happens all the time in movies. You might not want to kill me, but it's the only way to guarantee my silence. It's not by the way," she added quickly, "I can keep a secret." Jake sighed. "You might think so, but this is one hell of a secret. Keeping it won't be easy, and the repercussions if you don't. Let's say the stakes are Extremely high. I'll bet. You have no idea. This kind of security breach isn't supposed to happen. We take great care to make sure humans have no idea we exist. Just how many of you are there? He squeezed his eyes shut. Damn. How many, Jake? 6? 20? Thousands. When he opened his eyes, his gaze was bleak. The less you know the better, so I'm not going to answer that question. He hesitated, as if choosing his words very carefully. This really is not good, Rachel. I blame myself, but unfortunately you'll suffer the consequences too. The fear returned. Like what? I don't know yet. He rubbed the back of his neck. If you don't, who does? She'd been so pleased with her relatively calm reaction to finding out her neighbor was a werewolf, but his uncertainty about her fate was creating a panicky feeling she might not be able to control much longer. Never mind. But whatever happens, I promise I won't turn you over to the Council. There is one. Her voice went up an octave. Shit. Forget I said that. Does this Council kill people? No. For God's sake, quit talking like that. Wers don't kill. We have a bad reputation thanks to horror novels in Hollywood, but we're not killers. We're protectors. She really wanted to believe him. But you mentioned something about me paying the consequences. Forgive me if I'm a tad bit worried. Then let me explain at least a little. Now that you've discovered I'm a werewolf, I can't let you waltz out of here as if nothing happened. She nodded. Exactly, so the easiest thing is to wring my neck. But you don't seem to want to, so what's the alternative? One option is taking you as my mate. What the hell? I didn't say I was going to do that. It's one option. Heat slews through her. She couldn't tell whether it was from indignation or sexual excitement, but she chose anger over arousal. Sorry, buddy, but that doesn't happen in my world. In my world, the woman has a choice in the matter. And no male, no matter how hairy, gets to declare that he's going to take me. Got that, Jake? His proposal was primitive and it was wrong. But not without appeal, damn it. I get it, Rachel. Believe me, I'm no more eager to choose that option than you are. Why not? Now she was insulted. I have a deep and abiding conviction that Wers should never mate with humans. Yes, she truly was insulted. That's not what Duncan McDowell says. She held up the book she'd been reading. He thinks it's a swell idea. Duncan McDowell is an idiot. That explains all the notes in the margins. You were marshalling your arguments. I was. He cleared his throat. So mating with you is out, which means we have to come up with a different solution. Great. Putting McDowell's book on the bedside table, she grabbed one of her shoes and began loosening the laces so she could get it back on. Let's sleep on it. I'll be in touch. You misunderstand. His large frame filled the doorway, blocking her exit. Until we come up with that solution, you're staying with me. Her jaw dropped. You're holding me prisoner? I'd rather say I'm detaining you for your own good. How is holding me prisoner going to be for my own good? Let me put it this way. You know enough to be dangerous. If you were to escape, I'd be obligated to report that to the Council. They would dispatch other Wers to find you and detain you. You mean hunt me down? Breathing grew difficult as she imagined being chased by werewolves. In a sense. She shuddered. I'm assuming you'd rather stay here with me than go through that. Well, duh. How about I leave and you don't report me because you trust me? I'm a very trustworthy person. Ask anyone. She got one shoe on and started working with the laces of the second. Can't. I'll take an oath, sign in blood. I have some pictures of me naked in a waiting pool. You can have them for blackmail purposes. The idea that you'd show those pictures around will keep my lips zipped forever, guaranteed. She tied her second shoe. A hint of laughter flickered in his eyes. How old were you in those pictures? 4. I'd like to see those sometime. Let me run home and get them. She stood. I'll leave my wallet here as collateral. Sorry. You're not going anywhere. Not until I figure out a plan. She blew out a breath. This is freaking unbelievable. That tiny flare of humor in his gaze made her feel a little bit better, but not much. He shrugged. I'm not any happier about it than you are. Sounds as if we're in for a lovely evening then. It is what it is. Guess so. Be careful what you wish for, she thought as she gazed at him. She was about to spend several hours in lockdown with the man who fueled her fantasies, and he hated the prospect. Also, small detail, he wasn't a man. Chapter 10. Jake had been in tight spots before, but he'd always figured a way out of them. This fuck-up with Rachel could turn out to be the granddaddy of all exceptions. Although he did his best to project calm acceptance of an unfortunate situation, he was a mass of nerves. On top of that, he was hungry for food mostly. But the minute he'd walked into his house and discovered it was filled with Rachel's scent, he'd become hungry for something far more complicated, something a simple dinner wouldn't take care of. Finding her propped up on his massive bed had tested his willpower more than anything had in years. He needed to get her out of his bedroom pronto before he did something really stupid and seduced her. She might not be seducible, of course, but he had a gut-level feeling that she was. His instincts were sharply honed in that regard, and Rachel was giving off little sparks of interest in between her bursts of outrage. Her scent had changed subtly, too, ever since he'd confronted her. Having her stay with him for the next few hours would be easier if he kept them both far, far from that bed while they worked on a solution to this gigantic problem. He took most of the responsibility for the mess they were in, but she sure as hell hadn't helped. Damned nosy woman. But he'd been afraid she'd grab the chance to poke around his place looking for the wolf. He should have anticipated that and locked his door. He couldn't help admiring her tenacity and concern for another creature. Though, even if she had landed them both in hot water, hands on her hips, she stood watching him. Now what? I could use some dinner. Have you eaten yet? No. Hungry. She paused as if thinking about it. A little. He turned from the doorway. Then let me thaw a couple of steaks for us. I'm really not that hungry after all. He pivoted to face her again. Would you rather have something else? I think there are some chicken breasts in the freezer. Or I could. No, you go ahead. I'm more tired than hungry. You eat and I'll stretch out on your bed for a little while and rest. She sat on the edge of the bed and untied her running shoes. He gulped. Don't do that. Do what? She glanced up. Take anything off. I mean, don't take a nap on my bed. I won't mess it up, Jake. I admit I rearranged your pillow while I was reading, but I'll put everything back the way I found it. Sheesh, I didn't know you were such an anal neat freak. It's not like I'll get under the covers if that's what you're worried about. Never mind. I'll just relax in the living room. I'm not worried that you'll mess up the bed. If only she knew how much he wanted to mess it up with her. He switched back to the safer topic of food. It's just that I thought you were hungry, and suddenly you're not. It's kind of late, and you said you haven't had dinner, so surely you want something to eat. She leaned down and fussed with the laces of her shoes. She made a big production out of it, almost as if she needed something else to concentrate on, so that she didn't have to look at him. Maybe I'll have something later. Want me to grill your steak so you can have a steak sandwich when you're ready? She finished with her shoes and stood. Please don't fire up the grill on my account. Go ahead and eat. I'll have some of your fruit and nut cereal if I get hungry. So she checked out the contents of his cupboards while she was at it. But that wasn't the most significant thing she'd said just now. He finally understood her reluctance to eat with him, and he was both horrified and amused. You think I'm going to eat my steak raw, don't you? Keeping her expression carefully neutral, she nodded. But there's nothing wrong with that, she added quickly. You should be allowed to eat whatever way you want in your own home. He couldn't blame her for thinking such a thing. He devoured both raw steak and raw hamburger over at her place. She didn't know that had been under duress. I prefer my meat cooked, he said. Her eyes widened. You do? But you're a shapeshifter. Maybe it'll help to use that term instead of werewolf. I'm not strictly speaking a wolf at all. I can take that form, but I'd rather not eat once I've shifted. That is, unless I have no alternative. Oh. Her cheeks turned a soft pink, which made her quicksilver eyes even brighter. Sorry about that. I didn't know. No need to apologize. I was grateful for any food, raw or cooked. God, she was beautiful. He'd need a bigger vocabulary just to describe all the rich shades of brown in her shoulder-length hair. The last time he'd stood this close to her, he'd been half crazy with pain, but now he was free to enjoy every second of close proximity. He breathed in her almond scent, which had become like an aphrodisiac. How in Hell, would he make it through this night without doing something foolish? Maybe he was destined to act like a fool and pay the price. I knew you were famished, she said. I used it to trick you so I could keep you captive longer. She hesitated. Now I have to wonder, would you have been better off if I'd simply left you alone? He hesitated to give her the answer, both because it might make her feel bad, and because he really did want to limit her knowledge. You would have been better off. Regret laced her words. I can tell by your expression. Shifting helps me heal. He could say that much without causing more problems. She groaned. And I thought I was helping. That's all that counts. He resisted the urge to cup her face as he said, that you were nothing but kind to me during that 24-hour period. I'll never forget how caring you were. You'd saved me from that bear, so of course I wanted to take care of you. Didn't know I was doing it wrong. You couldn't know that. I was so grateful to you. I'm still grateful in spite of, well, everything. She paused. But how did you happen to show up in the nick of time? That was a topic he'd rather not discuss either. We can talk about it over dinner. Maybe by then he'd have come up with a great cover story. That is if you're willing to share a meal with me now that you know I have decent table manners. She smiled. I am willing. More than willing. I'm starving and I'd love a steak. Good. Fixing dinner would give him something to concentrate on besides his recurring fantasy of rolling around with her on that big bed. He headed for the kitchen. How do you like your steak? He called over his shoulder. Barely pink. Got it. He liked his steak rare, but after this touchy conversation he'd cook his a little longer so it looked the same as hers. He might not be able to erase her image of him in wolf form tearing into the raw meat she'd offered him days ago, but he'd sure as hell like to. As she followed him through the living room, a cell phone rang and it wasn't his. Don't answer, he said quickly. Sorry, but you don't get to decide that. She pulled her phone from the backpack she'd left sitting in his easy chair. Hi Ted. What's up? Jake clenched his jaw. He should have known she wouldn't accept a barked order. If he'd said please she might have responded better. And now she was on the phone with Ted and no telling what she'd say to him. Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm at his cabin right now, but thanks for letting me know anyway. I happened to be passing by and saw his truck was here, so I stopped. Jake shook his head in frustration. When he'd stopped at the general store on his way home to pick up his mail and let Ted know he was back early, Ted had mentioned that Rachel wanted some advice on hikes in the area. He'd known then that he might have trouble, and sure enough, she'd wanted to make certain he was really gone so she could case the joint, and the hiking thing had been a smokescreen. Yes, Jake's been extremely helpful. He's offered to take me out hiking tomorrow, in fact. Jake stared at her. What in God's name was she doing telling Ted they were going on a hike together? Should be a good day for it. Anyway, thanks for letting me know he was back. Talk to you soon. Bye. She disconnected the call and tucked the phone into her pack. Would you care to explain that? She faced him, her expression unapologetic. I made up a story for Ted that I needed hiking advice so I could find out how long you'd be gone. So you could nose around. I realized that. But what's the point of telling him? We're going hiking tomorrow. Just planning ahead. In case you hadn't noticed, we have a big issue to resolve. Trust me, I noticed. She crossed her arms and gazed at him with those amazing silver gray eyes. What if we don't get it figured out tonight? At the moment he didn't want to figure out anything. He wanted to walk over there and haul her into his arms. We have to. Because the longer he was locked in this dance with her, the less control he'd have over his raging libido. And that, she uncrossed her arms and pointed at him, is exactly why we might get stuck. Too much pressure. We could freeze up. Or burn up. That seemed more likely. I won't let that happen. Then great, we'll cancel the hike. She used air quotes to make her point. But if for some reason your magnificent brain stalls tonight, we don't have to avoid everyone we know while we hole up in this cabin struggling to find an answer. We can leave on the hike I just mentioned to Ted. That might not be a bad way to clear our heads anyway. I hope it won't come to that. A hint of vulnerability shadowed her expression. Can't wait to get rid of me. Yes, but not for the reason she thought. Nobody likes to have problems, and you present one. It's not your fault. Well, some of it is. If you'd resisted the urge to come over here and investigate, we wouldn't be in this situation. I owed it to the wolf, who it turns out was me. Yes, but I didn't know that. And my debt is actually to you, when you put it that way. I guess if I help find a solution to our problem, that would be a way of me settling up with you. I'll accept that as a fair trade. And I hope for both our sakes we can come up with a workable plan. As you said, we have to. Right. And I don't know about you, but I can't think very well on an empty stomach. I'm going to start dinner. He started toward the kitchen. Good idea. She followed. Can I help? He wondered if having her sweet body in the kitchen would help or hinder. Probably hinder. Tell you what. How about if you set the table out on the deck? I'll bet you know where all the utensils are. He gave her a knowing glance as he opened the freezer door. Instead of looking guilty, she laughed. I do. I searched your kitchen for anything strange and only came up with a wolf's head bottle opener. I bought that in Anchorage as an inside joke. He took the wrapping off the steaks and put them on a plate in the microwave. Speaking of the bottle opener, what would you say to opening a couple of bottles of spruce tip ale? I can do that. She went straight to the right drawer and took out the opener. He took a couple of bottles from the door in the refrigerator and handed them to her. Even though you've been through all the drawers and cupboards, I'm impressed that you remember where the bottle opener was. Good memory. She popped the top from a bottle and gave it back to him. I'll keep that in mind. It doesn't mean I blurt out everything I remember though. Just so you know. After opening her bottle, she raised it in his direction. Here's to solutions. I'll drink to that. The ale tasted good shared with Rachel. He thought about his dinner with Giselle. The air hadn't crackled when he and Giselle were together, but it certainly crackled now. Rachel opened the utensil drawer and gathered up what they'd need for the meal. Are you sure you trust me to go out on the deck by myself? What if I tried to escape? He'd been crouched in front of the bottom bin of the refrigerator while he chose a couple of potatoes to bake in the microwave after he'd thawed the steaks. He glanced up at her. You wouldn't get far. She met his gaze. I might. I'm pretty fast. Not as fast as I am. Holding 2 potatoes in one hand, he stood. What, you have some sort of war speed? Something like that. She shrugged. I wouldn't try it anyway. You just call that war council. And I'd have war police on my trail. And then the entire war community would be involved. I'd rather keep this to ourselves if we can. Contain the damage? Exactly. I'm good with that. I won't try to run away. Her hands full of utensils, placemats and napkins, she left the kitchen. But shortly she was back to retrieve her bottle of ale. He put her to work scrubbing carrots and was mesmerized by the way her breast shifted beneath her t-shirt as she did that chore. So he looked away but couldn't block out her scent, her body heat, or her soft breathing. Everything about her called to him. Because he was attuned to her breathing, he noticed it picked up whenever he came close. That could be because she now knew he was a werewolf, but he thought it was more than that. She wanted him to. That knowledge was good for his ego, but bad for their chances of keeping the evening from getting out of hand. After about 10 minutes of effort, the potatoes were in the microwave and the carrots steaming away in a saucepan. They'd moved on to their second bottle of ale apiece, and Rachel carried those out to the deck while Jake brought the platter of steaks, a long-handled fork, and his basket of spices. You're obviously used to cooking. She set both bottles on the elevated patio table and climbed up onto one of 4 tall swivel chairs grouped around it. I like doing it. He adjusted the heat on the gas grill. When I take groups out on the trail, it's a fun challenge to prepare them a decent meal in the middle of nowhere. It's one of my selling points. Do you ever cook for other werewolves? Sometimes. He put on the steaks and came over to join her at the table. Look, it'd be better if you don't ask questions. As I said before, the less you know. I disagree. What you want from me is loyalty and trustworthiness, right? What he really wanted from her was something he wasn't supposed to have. He tipped his bottle and drank some ale before he answered the question. Ignorance would be preferable. Too late. I know you're a werewolf and that there's a werewolf council out there somewhere. You threatened me with werewolves who would hunt me down if I tried to run away from you. I'm envisioning an entire shadow community living alongside the human population. Am I right? I'm taking the fifth on that. She blew out an impatient breath. Look, I'm pretty smart, Jake, and I'll probably figure a lot of this out on my own. You're certainly free to do that, but I don't have to supply any more details. She sipped her ale and gazed at the mountains in the half-light of an Alaskan summer evening. A breeze ruffled Polecat Lake, causing small ripples to lap against the shore. Through all that, he could almost hear Rachel thinking. Almost. They'd had a mental connection for a brief time after he'd shifted into wolf form, but he wasn't as psychic as a human. He could certainly feel lust in the air, though. The aroma of grilled steak teased his nostrils. That smell, combined with the tang of the ale he'd consumed and the almond scent of a female he wanted, aroused him to a level he hadn't reached in a long time. Considering the trouble he was in, he shouldn't allow himself to enjoy this sensually rich moment with Rachel. But he couldn't seem to help himself. She was potent. At last she spoke again. I've been thinking. I'm sure. He wondered if any of her thoughts had to do with the sexual tension building between them. I mean, does it matter whether I knew a few details or a lot of details? In a case like this, there's no such thing as a small leak. He had to admit she had a point. She tilted her bottle, took a drink and swallowed, her delicate throat moving seductively, making him long to nip that slender column. Then she looked over at him. I'm just glad you're not planning to have me rubbed out. He had a mouthful of ale when she said that, because he didn't want to spew it all over her. He choked instead. She left her chair to pound him on the back, which was of no help. It worked well for pieces of food lodged in someone's windpipe, but did nothing for ale that had gone down the wrong way. Finally he was able to breathe again. You okay, sport? She resumed her seat and peered at him. Yeah. He grinned and shook his head. Rubbed out? Where do you come up with things like that? I watch a lot of movies. I love the world of the imagination. And FYI now that I know werewolves exist, I think it's plain mean for you not to tell me all the juicy details. Like I said, a leak is a leak. I'm only thinking that you can't blab what you don't know. You say that like somebody's going to put thumb screws on me and force me to talk. They're not, Jake. We live a fairly isolated existence up here, and when I travel for work, I guarantee nobody will ask me what I know about werewolves. If I keep my mouth shut, and I will, the subject won't come up. He studied her. I want to believe that you can keep your mouth shut. He shouldn't be discussing her mouth, though, because it made him think of what fun he could have exploring it. I can absolutely do that. I understand the issues. I may understand them better than most because I have such an active imagination. But I have to ask, are werewolves planning to take over the world? What? It's a fair question. In most alien movies, the aliens are planning to take over the world. Why wouldn't werewolves want to do that too? Because it's not our nature to be aggressive. He almost added that we're lovers, not fighters, but thought better of it. But you're organized enough to have a council, and apparently you look out for each other, even if you don't always agree, like in the case of you and Duncan McDowell. In his book, Duncan referred to extensive business interests. Do werewolves have a lot of money? Jake put down his empty bottle and stood. I need to check the steak. She seemed undeterred by his attempt to change the subject. Because if they have a lot of money, they might be planning an economic takeover. Or maybe they already control huge chunks of the economy. If that's so, then steaks are done. Let's eat. Don't think you can stop me from asking questions by keeping my mouth busy with food. Naturally, that comment made him think of another way he could keep her mouth busy. He loaded the steaks on a platter and set it on the table. Can't blame me for trying. I'm just warning you it won't work. Straightening in her chair, she eyed him with defiance. Just his luck he found her attitude extremely sexy. Then I'll have to use more creative ways to shut you up. And what's that supposed to mean? He allowed himself a very slow, very male perusal of her body. Use your imagination. Chapter 11. Hoa. Rachel hadn't been born yesterday, and she recognized a sexual gauntlet when it had been thrown down. Jake had just served notice that he had testosterone and he wasn't afraid to use it. After all those nights of watching him skinny dipping, she was more than primed for whatever he cared to dish out. Desire gripped her tight, warming her skin and dampening her panties. She wanted him bad. Sure, he wasn't quite who she'd imagined during those nights of spying on his naked swimming routine. He had another, rather unusual, side to him. But she could ignore that aspect because at this moment in time he was the built for sin man she'd admired through her binoculars. Bring it on, big boy. She was more than willing to abandon the meal and have a close encounter right here on the deck or up against the railing, or spinning on one of the swivel chairs surrounding the table. Nobody else was around except a few geese on the lake and the occasional fish leaping out of the water. They wouldn't mind. Jake's gaze met hers and he swore softly, but instead of grabbing her and ripping her clothes off as she'd fantasized he might, he took a deep breath. That's some imagination you have. Her pulse raced. You can read my mind? Don't have to. It's all there in your eyes. He groaned. God, Rachel. We can't do this. But you want me. If his expression hadn't told her so, the fit of his jeans would have. Yes. And that's a problem. He turned away. I'll get the rest of the food. Help yourself to a steak. He disappeared into the house. During the brief time Jake was gone, Rachel had a moment to decompress and think about what had just happened. She'd read enough in Duncan McDowell's book to know that for worse, sex wasn't the same as mating. She and Jake could have sex without making a lifetime commitment, and that seemed to be what he was morally against. Yet he'd said wanting her was a problem for him. She'd have to ask him to explain because she didn't understand. She also wondered how long he'd been nurturing this case of lust. There was that telltale note of hers tucked inside a book with her picture in it. How ironic if he'd wanted her as long as she'd wanted him. By the time he returned with the potatoes and carrots, she'd made up her mind. There's no way around it, Jake. You have to level with me. I know. He took the chair opposite hers but didn't pick up his fork. I decided the same thing while I was in the kitchen. Ultimately, I started the whole thing when I bought your carving. That was my first mistake. Mistake? She stared at him. Are you kidding me? You inspired me to give up on becoming a vet so I could devote myself to my art. I not only owe you my life, I owe you my career. No, you don't. Someone else would have bought that carving. Then you would have them to thank. And we wouldn't be in the middle of this big mess. I don't agree with that logic. Hearing your positive comments about the carving was as important as the sale, maybe more important. I was meant to be in that store when you walked in. You have no idea what a boost your comments gave me. In fact, I wrote you a note to that effect. You probably don't remember, though. She was a devil to mention it, but she couldn't resist. A dull red stain crept up the back of his neck. I seem to remember a note. She didn't push it. She didn't want to embarrass him by pointing out his sentimentality. I'm just saying that sale was a significant episode on my way to becoming a full-time carver. There would have been different episodes. You're very talented. You would have made it with or without that moment in Ted's store. Now eat your food before it gets cold. You sound like my mother. He smiled. No cook wants food to sit around after they've fixed it. Dig in. But you promised to tell me everything. I will. He cut into his steak. Between bites. It's a long story, so I need to keep up my strength. And so do you. Okay. She sliced into her steak, which was grilled exactly as she liked it. She couldn't resist glancing over at Jake's, which was the same shade of pale pink inside. She thought that might be on purpose. Now start talking. He did, pausing sporadically to eat. He told her about his father, the actual wolf she'd photographed and immortalized in wood. He mentioned that his parents had died in a skiing accident but didn't dwell on that part of the story. He did admit, though, that after buying her carving he'd become fascinated with her and had fallen into the habit of late-night runs over to her place, which explained why he'd kept her note. She finished her last bite and put down her fork. Are you saying that we wasted 3 years when we could have been? She trailed off, not sure what the relationship might have developed into. He shook his head as he finished chewing and swallowed. No, we couldn't not. Without me becoming a hypocrite. How's that? Think about it. The obvious way to halt human mating is to end human sexual encounters. If a were never has sex with a human, he or she won't be tempted to consider mating with one. So you've never had sex with a human? Nope. He picked up his ale and took a drink. Because she was watching him very closely, she noticed that his hand quivered. Ever so slightly. Ever been tempted? He set down the bottle and glanced at her. You mean other than you? Right. Maybe a little, but I could always shrug it off. He looked out over the lake. If I hadn't bought that carving, I might have been okay. But you put a part of yourself in that piece and I felt it drawing me. That's why I had to get rid of it. You make it sound like the carving's possessed. It is. He gave her a half smile. By you. Jake, I've sold carvings to lots of people, including many single guys. Not one of them has insinuated that my work makes them want to take me to bed. Maybe they're more polite and civilized than I am. It might affect them that way, but they don't want to offend you. He leaned both elbows on the table. None of your clients have propositioned you, though? No. Partly because I never give them the chance. He nodded. Makes sense. You don't want to mix business with pleasure. Actually, I'd be happy to mix business with pleasure, but none of my clients have appealed to me in that way. So who have you been dating? None of your beeswax. Probably not, but I want to know. I assume you're not hooked up with someone now, or you wouldn't have given me the green light a while ago. But I'll bet there's been a guy. You're too beautiful to stay celibate. Thank you for that. I was beginning to think without my carving I'd have no sex appeal at all. He laughed. Oh my God. You're kidding, right? You have been raving on about that carving and the effect it had on you. Then let me set your mind to rest on that score. The carving is the icing on the cake, but the cake is plenty rich without it. Sad to say, I'm on a sugar-free diet. She polished off her ale. Aren't you the least bit curious about how sex with a human would be? Oh, I'm very curious, but I'm also not a fan of hypocrisy. I've set myself up as the standard bearer for the cause. All my traveling since last October has been to promote the organization I founded, Werewolves Against Random Mating. That's why I was in San Francisco on business for WARM. WARM. It's an acronym. Oh, like Duncan McDowell has WOOF. Werewolves Optimizing Our Future. Jake frowned, clearly unhappy that she brought Duncan into the conversation. Yes, he does, damn it. Plus he wrote a book that I felt compelled to buy and read. If you hadn't found it in my nightstand drawer, you'd still be in the dark about all this. I guess you don't believe that things happen for a reason. He gazed at her. I guess you do. I take after my grandpa Ike, and he was a big believer in that. I'm sure he'd say you were supposed to be my first customer and that we were destined to have this connection. Are you saying he would have been happy that you're connected to a werewolf? He might have if he'd had enough information. Don't think I've forgotten your promise to tell all. You still have a lot of ground to cover. I'll tell you more after you've answered the dating question you've continued to dodge. I'm sure you could have your pick, so do you go for corporate types? Other artists? Jocks? She thought about how to answer. Maybe all things considered he deserved the truth. I haven't been dating. Really? Yes, really. At first I was too busy with work, and then I was worried that someone would be attracted to the fame and fortune instead of me personally. So at the suggestion of my girlfriends in Fairbanks, I signed up for a couple of online sites about 6 months ago. And nada. Can't get worked up about any of them. I'm dateless in Polecat. Damn. That sucks. Fortunately, I have an active fantasy life involving my neighbor. Jake's eyes widened. Leaning back in his chair, he raised both eyebrows and pointed a finger at his chest. Yes, you Aquaman. Thanks to your regular skinny dipping schedule and my grandfather's excellent binoculars, my fantasy life is doing fine. Adorably, his face turned red. Didn't know I had an audience. A very appreciative audience, I might add. Jake scrubbed a hand across his face, as if he could wipe off the embarrassment. When he finally looked at her, chagrin had been replaced with the ever-present glow of desire. Ah, Rachel, what are we going to do about this crazy situation? She'd been thinking of little else all through the meal. Well, I'm already the keeper of one big secret. Right. His green eyes grew wary. Why not make it two? He took a shaky breath. I was afraid you were going to say that. Were you afraid? Or were you perhaps hoping I would? He hesitated. Probably both. Ever since I walked in and found you in my bedroom, I've wondered how the hell I'd make it through this without cracking. And now I discover you've been fantasizing about me, too. So, are you about ready to crack? Yeah. Afraid so. Her pulse skyrocketed. Oh. And now that I've admitted that, it's time to take this discussion inside. Heat danced through her veins as she helped him gather up the dishes. They'd found no long-range solutions, but they might have hit on a short-range one. Jake wanted to blame Rachel's confession for sending him over the edge, but then again it wouldn't have taken much. He'd been teetering for a long time. Now that he was about to fall, he couldn't wait. Carrying the empty meat platter and their ale bottles, he followed her into the kitchen. Just dump everything in the sink. We'll worry about it later. She followed his instructions and turned back to him. I forgot the placemats. Let him blow. Shoving the platter and bottles onto the counter, he pulled her into his arms. At last, with a sigh, he lowered his head for the kiss he'd been dreaming about for 3 years. Incredibly, she put her hand to his mouth, halting his forward progress. Wait, Jake. Capturing her wrist, he tugged her hand away. I'm through waiting. I want you so much I'm dizzy. When she started to say something else, he took that golden opportunity to kiss her when her mouth was open. Warm, moist, soft. A velvet playground. The thought that she was human, not word, drifted through his mind and was gone. She was Rachel, and kissing her felt like coming home. He groaned with delight when she pressed her fingers into his scalp and kissed him back. God, she felt great pressed up against him, her breasts tight against his chest, her pelvis cradling his erection as they undulated together, 2 halves of a whole. He began undressing her without thinking about it. All he knew was that her clothes were in the way, and he wanted them gone. She seemed to want his gone too, and that was fine with him. She kissed him with even more urgency as her fingers flew down the row of buttons holding his shirt together. The kitchen filled with the sound of rapid breathing and soft murmurs of joy. Then came Jake's muted oath of frustration when he realized he had to deal with her running shoes before he could slide off her jeans. Grasping her hips, he hoisted her up on the counter. The platter and bottles he'd put there earlier tumbled with a crash into the sink. He ignored them and dropped to his knees so he could yank at the laces of her shoes. Forget untying. She gulped for air. Just pull them off. He did, followed by her jeans and her gratifyingly wet panties. As he stood, he realized he loved having her at counter level. Extremely convenient. Cupping her face in both hands, he leaned in to kiss her again. He already knew he'd never tire of doing that. Once again she tried to say something, but it was muffled against his questing mouth. Moving aside the lapels of his shirt, she flattened her palms against his chest and began a sensuous massage. Her touch was heaven, but he wished she'd unfasten his jeans and unzip his fly. He could do it, but then he'd have to stop stroking her silky breasts, and he was entranced with those. Do you have a condom? He paused in mid-nuzzle, confused as to why she'd ask him that. He didn't need condoms. Never had. Never would. Then the truth of the situation penetrated his hormone-soaked brain. She'd asked because she was human. Humans needed condoms to prevent unplanned pregnancies and disease. Because he'd never had sex with a human before, he hadn't thought of that tiny detail. Reluctantly leaving the erotic contemplation of her plump breasts, he raised his head to look into her gray eyes. They reminded him of storm clouds heavy with rain begging for release. He wanted to give her that release, and very soon too. He'd rather not have to take time for a lengthy explanation about werewolves and birth control. Worse, don't use condoms. Lightning flashed in her storm cloud eyes. If they intend to have sex with me, they do. He definitely intended to have sex with her, but he didn't have a single condom in the house. If he'd had one, he would have used it to forestall an argument. But he'd never bought one in his life. He tried to keep the explanation concise. He had things to do, orgasms to give. We're disease resistant and we can't get a female pregnant unless we've been through the mating ritual. I've heard that line before and I didn't buy it then either. He sucked in a breath. From a werewolf? No, from a guy who didn't like wearing little raincoats on his pride and joy. He claimed to be disease-free and sterile. I kicked him out of bed. I'm different. I won't argue that point, but the part about not getting me pregnant sounds fishy. She looked him in the eye. We need to rethink this. He wanted to howl in frustration. They'd been so close. More than close. Actually, she was completely naked and he could be naked in no time. Except, she didn't trust him without a condom in hand, or more precisely on his cock. Time for a compromise. He stroked her thighs. At least let me make you come. No, she grasped his wrists. That could be a trick. You give me a lovely Orgasm, and while I'm feeling all loose and accommodating, you get busy. I'm insulted that you believe that of me. Anyone who tries to have sex without a condom is suspect in my book. She shoved at his bare chest. Go on now. Move away so I can get down and put my clothes on. What can I do to convince you? I don't know, Jake. I'm not an easy sell on this point. She hopped down from the counter and began gathering her clothes. It's not like I can run up to the store and buy some. Ted's closed up for the night, and besides, I wouldn't dare buy them from him when he knows we're hanging out together. Yeah, that would be a bad idea. She shrugged. Oh well. I know you have ice cream in your freezer. Shall we have some dessert? Her nonchalance about this irritated him to no end. He ached from not following through on what they'd started. She must be in bad shape too, but she wasn't willing to let on. Now she wanted to act as if a bowl of chocolate ice cream would suit her in place of a mind-blowing climax that was insulting to his abilities as a lover. He could give her way more pleasure than that stupid ice cream. He blew out a breath. That's a damn poor substitute for the dessert I had in mind. Maybe so, but we can both enjoy it without worrying about consequences other than a sugar high. I'll dish it up. He buttoned his shirt as he stomped over to the refrigerator. He was already thinking of a way he might be able to prove to her that he didn't need condoms when they had sex, but it would involve breaching their security even more than he already had. How far was he willing to go to satisfy this craving? Pretty far. Chapter 12. Bitterly disappointed in Jake, Rachel sat in his easy chair eating ice cream and wishing he could have been the wonderful lover she'd imagined he would be. She tried to settle the condom issue early on, but he hadn't let her talk to him. Then he'd been ready to blow right past the subject with some weird mumbo-jumbo about werewolves not needing them. Yeah, right. Maybe next he'd try to sell her oceanfront property in Arizona. She might be running a sexual deficit these days, but she wasn't bankrupt enough to chance a condomless encounter with Jake Hunter, no matter how gorgeous he was. While she sat in the easy chair, he paced the living room, eating from his ice cream bowl as he roamed around, probably walking it off at being the large erection she'd felt when they'd been so close together she wouldn't have been able to slide a DVD between them. Pausing in his circuit of the room, he faced her. You wanted to know more about the werewolf community, right? Sure. He was trying to get on her good side, but she had to admit he was going about it the right way. She was dying of curiosity. She suspected that Duncan's book wouldn't be available at a normal bookstore or online outlet, but she wanted a copy. If Jake fell asleep, which he'd have to do eventually, she'd go read the rest of it while she had the chance. Naturally, WERs can't use the internet without being found out, so we've created our own digital communication system that only WERs can access. Duncan has a blog on it. I have a website for Worm there too. We also have a version of Twitter, only we call it Sniffer. Rachel couldn't help smiling. That's funny. Want to see it work? She gazed up at him. You know how to tempt a girl, don't you, Jake? He didn't deny it. I could get in huge trouble for showing you this, but he shrugged. I'm already in huge trouble, and you'll learn more about us this way. Maybe that's a good thing, like you said. She wasn't fooled. You're going to round up some support for your claim about not needing condoms while you're on this sniffer thing, aren't you? It's a thought. She fell into a fit of giggles. We're or human, male animals are all the same. They think with their dick. Hey, I've wanted to seduce you for 3 years. I've controlled that urge. Because it was inappropriate. I didn't give in until you were right under my nose. You're damned right I'm focused on my cock. Fair enough. She glanced around. Where's your computer? I don't remember seeing one when I was here earlier. What you meant to say was you didn't see one when you invaded my private space late this afternoon. Isn't that right? She finished the last of her ice cream and scraped the bowl with her spoon. I felt justified. Want more ice cream? No thank you. She stood and walked into the kitchen with her bowl. FYI, you have some broken dishes in the sink. She thought about why they were broken, and sexual excitement curled within her. It was almost worth it. She walked back into the living room. Smartass. It's not my fault that you came to the party without a present. I don't need a present for that particular party, but you won't believe me. He set his ice cream bowl on an end table and walked over to the duffel bag that still sat in the entry. Let's go on Sniffer and see what information we get on the subject. I just realized you haven't unpacked from your trip. I've been busy. Crouching down, he unzipped the duffel and pulled out a laptop. I should thank you, by the way, until you managed to coax the powers. That beats a lay cable up here. I was dead in the water when it came to going online. That was going to be a big problem for gathering supporters for Warm. You helped the cause. Oh goody. She wasn't sure how she felt about his cause. It sounded elitist to her, but then she wasn't a werewolf living in fear of discovery. She should remember that before passing judgment. After crossing to his bookshelf and turning on a modem tucked in with the books, he sat on his sofa with the laptop. Soon he'd booted it up. Come on over. I'll show you what Sniffer looks like. Unable to resist, she sat on the sofa next to him. He was giving her entrance into a secret society, and that was the stuff of novels and movies. Unfortunately, she wouldn't be able to tell anyone about this ever. As Jake typed his login and password, she thought about how her parents would react if she tried to tell them about Jake and his underground community. She wouldn't, of course. She would keep this secret forever, and once Jake believed that, they could go about their separate lives. But it was still interesting to imagine what sort of response she'd get from her folks. Her dad would think she'd gone stir-crazy up here in the woods. Her mother would want to believe, but she might eventually side with her husband and decide Rachel was imagining things again, realizing that she'd never convince her closest family members comforted her. A secret wasn't particularly fun to tell if nobody believed you and instead hustled you off for a psychiatric evaluation. Jake might be worried about exposure, but Rachel didn't think it was all that likely. So here we are. This is Sniffer. He pointed to a screen that closely resembled Twitter. Let's see what I can dig up without alerting anyone as to why I'm asking. Because you have your reputation to protect? Exactly. He typed in researching origins of condom-free were sex. Was it always this way? Then he hit the send button and sat back. I see you're following Duncan McDowell on Sniffer. Have to. He's a lunatic and I have to keep track of what madness he'll suggest next. Jake seemed to relish the idea of going toe-to-toe with McDowell. Rachel took note that Jake, like many of the human males she'd known, enjoyed the challenge of a worthy opponent. Duncan seemed to fill the bill. His posts were funny and intelligent, just like his book. She'd like to meet him some day, but doubted she ever would. She watched in fascination as messages popped up on the screen, accompanied by a little snuffling sound. Sniffer indeed. Werewolves seem to have a sense of humor. Who's that Kate Stillman? Duncan references her a lot. His mate. She's being groomed to take over the alpha position in the Stillman pack, which is based in Denver. That's where the first annual conference was held last fall. A werewolf conference? Yep. Denver was full of werewolves and nobody knew about it? Jake glanced at her. We're very big on security. Kate organized the conference and did a great job. The sad part is she hooked up with McDowell during that conference and changed her stripes. She used to be firmly aligned with us, the conservative contingent. Now that she's McDowell's mate, she's more wishy-washy. Fascinating. Rachel could have been listening to a politician from a red state talking about a turncoat colleague, except once again Jake was discussing werewolves. But how can Kate serve as the Denver Pack Alpha when her mate Duncan's from Scotland? I read his bio in the front of his book, and he lives in some place called Glenbara. He's relocated to Denver, which doesn't please me. He's charismatic and he's liable to do more damage in person over here. I wish he'd stayed in Scotland. I see. As they sat huddled over the laptop, Rachel didn't miss the coziness of the setup. Jake's big warm body next to hers had a predictable effect. She scooted sideways but stayed close enough to read the messages. Afraid of me? Jake didn't take his attention from the screen. You're too damn sexy for your own good, Hunter. Thank you. He swore under his breath. Now McDowell's suggesting private nightclubs where humans and werewolves could meet. What a moron. If he's so big on mating with humans, why did he choose a werewolf and a budding pack alpha at that? He didn't intend to, but he fell for her, and that was that. Jake typed something to at Duncan McDowell on the subject of were human nightclubs. Aha. There's a sniff responding about condoms. And there's another one. 3 more. Looks like a popular topic. Let me see. Rachel leaned closer as the computer erupted in a chorus of Snuffles directed to at Jake Hunter. Thank God wers don't need those blasted things. Another reason for were sex. No explanation needed. Ready to give up on human chicks. They all insist on one. Yuck. No offspring until I was mated. Great system, eh? The sniffs kept coming, piling on top of each other. Rachel finally stopped reading and leaned back against the plump cushions of Jake's sofa. Seemed that he was telling her the truth. Werewolves didn't need condoms. And why wouldn't it be true? She'd fallen down the rabbit hole and discovered an alternate universe where anything could be true. The world she'd thought she knew reasonably well was nothing like she'd imagined. She'd just been introduced to a were-only digital messaging system called Sniffer. Jake had casually mentioned that someone named Kate Stillman was being groomed to be the alpha for a pack in Denver. A blogger named Duncan wanted to set up private were-human nightclubs. And last but certainly not least, she was sitting within a few inches of someone who looked like a man but could turn into a big black wolf. She should ask him more about the logistics and timing of that maneuver too. If they were going to spend quality time together, and it looked as if that might be in the cards, she didn't want to wake up and find herself in bed with the big bad wolf. Convinced? She nodded. Yes. Standing, she began her round of pacing. They had more to discuss, and she needed to put some space between them while they talked. Earlier she'd let herself be swept along on a tide of lust, but that was when she'd thought sex with Jake, as long as he stayed in human form, would be like sex with any man. But if he had built-in birth control and some sort of natural shield against disease, what else was in store if they got friendly between the sheets? She needed full disclosure before she got naked again. Any smart woman would demand that, even from a hottie like Jake. He turned off his laptop, shut the lid and set it on the coffee table in front of him. So if you're convinced that we can have sex without a condom, why are you pacing like a caged animal? Because I'm finally beginning to understand how different you are, both inside and out, and I don't want any unpleasant surprises. His smile was pure sin. How about nice surprises? Are you okay with those? Because I have some moves that I think you'll. Stop it, Jake. Don't flirt with me when I'm trying to get important information. It's distracting. God, I hope so. If not, I'd be worried that I'd lost my touch. Be serious. I want to know about this shifting thing. His teasing expression vanished and his green gaze grew kind. Okay, sorry. Ask me anything. Is shifting spontaneous or can you control it? I can control it, but I had to learn how. We develop our shifting ability during puberty, and at first it's very spontaneous, which means we have a rougher adolescence than human kids. No kidding. Each of us reacted differently, of course. For some, the stress of a big test would bring on a shift. For me, it was females, especially the beautiful ones. He winked at her. I outgrew it. Just FYI, so you're not insulted because I didn't spontaneously shift once I got you naked. That would have terrified me. Understandably so. But I'm not dangerous to you. I hope you believe that. She nodded, although if he changed into a wolf right in front of her, she might still scream. Did you go to a special school so no one would notice when you suddenly sprouted hair? The pack usually homeschools young wers for a couple of years until we get the hang of how to manage our shifts. She became conscious of staring at him the way she might stare at an alien who'd stepped out of a spaceship. That was rude, and she glanced away. Do you ever wish? She paused, thinking even her question was rude. Never mind. That I wasn't a werewolf? She met his gaze. Do you? Never. Why not? Wouldn't life be easier if you weren't? Maybe in some ways, but it wouldn't be a good trade-off. You already know about our built-in birth control. Our immune system is far superior to a humans, and my sensory perception is wolf-like even in human form. I don't know if a guy with normal 20/20 eyesight would have seen that bear from across the lake. I used binoculars to make a positive ID, but I didn't really need them. Okay, what else? Stamina. You mean like for running and stuff? Sexual excitement curled low in her belly. Yeah, running and stuff. His eyes lit with amusement. You're flirting again. Just answering your question. And implying something about your staying power, I might add. You can interpret it any way you like. He leaned forward and pinned her with a look. The truth is, I'm big and I'm strong, which isn't bragging on my part. Because most were males are. So the answer is no, I wouldn't trade places with a human male and give up the advantages I've inherited. I'm grateful to be. Were. Once again, she hesitated to ask something he might consider too personal. Rachel, I can see the questions in your eyes. I said you could ask me anything and you can. I won't be offended. What's it like to shift? Leaning his forearms on his knees, he let his big hands dangle between them as he stared at the floor. See, I have offended you. Not at all. When he lifted his head, his eyes glowed. I was trying to think how to explain it in a way that wouldn't sound too sappy, but it's like being reborn. My human body stretches and transforms into a powerful animal with more grace and presence than I will ever have looking like this. Personally, she had trouble imagining how anything could improve him. His broad shoulders stretched the cotton seams of his green shirt in a most impressive way, and his worn jeans lovingly hugged his taut thighs. He had the narrow hips of a well-conditioned athlete and the strong neck and square jaw of Superman. His black hair was so glossy it seemed almost blue in the light from the midnight sun coming through the window. So you like shifting then? Love it. What a rush. And then, if I can go for a run afterward and give those muscles a workout, there's nothing like it. He glanced at her with another half smile. Almost nothing. He sure did have the ability to make her juices flow. One look, one tiny smile, one suggestive remark, and her motor revved. But all this discussion of his prowess put her somewhat in awe of him. She wanted him more than ever, but he was used to having sex with Wers. They'd possess all the characteristics he did and would probably be a better match. They'd be able to keep up, whereas she hadn't even done well in gym class. Facing him, she cleared her throat. Maybe I should tell you a little bit about me. I'd love that. In school I had a reputation for being nerdy and quiet. I wasn't into sports, because frankly I'm not that coordinated. I spent most of my time either reading or roaming around outside looking for interesting animals to draw. Once I was old enough to learn carving from Grandpa Ike, I'd lose myself in that. Jake nodded. It's your gift. All that is to say that I'm not a great physical specimen. I'm probably not up to your. Hold it right there. Apparently you weren't listening when I said that ever. Since I saw you in Ted's store, I've wanted you with the heat of 1,000 suns. Yes, but nothing. He stood, all 6 foot and several inches of him. In the 3 years I've been dreaming about you, I've tried my damnedest to get interested. And we're females. I even took one of them to bed. She was magnificent, athletic, coordinated, tireless. That's what I'm saying. I'm none of those things. He came around the coffee table and walked toward her. Maybe not, but you're Rachel, the most talented, beautiful creature I've ever met. Knowing we have no future tears me up inside, but that doesn't stop me from wanting you in every way I can think of having you. Her heart beat so fast she thought she might pass out. He stood inches away but didn't touch her. I want my mouth on every inch of your skin. I want my tongue dipping into all your secret nooks and crannies. She gulped for air. She gazed up at him, mute and trembling, her pulse hammering like bongos. So you see, Rachel. He reached out and traced a finger across her quivering lower lip. You don't have to be anything more than you already are to be everything I've always wanted. He took a deep breath. Now will you please come into the bedroom? With a supreme effort, she forced her vocal cords to deliver the only response any sane woman could possibly have to an invitation like that. Hell yes.